Chapter 12. A Tussle on the Sand. Rachel slid down the side of the sand dune to where Pam was holding the piece of ore with the letters MYS. "It's a wonderful clue," she cried excitedly. "Maybe the old pirate ship is buried right here." "Let's get everybody and start digging," Pam said, jumping up. But before they had a chance to set off, a voice cried for them to stop, and Homer roughly dashed up to them from the rear. "I heard what you said," he cried out. "You can't take that ore." "And why not?" Pam asked. "I found it." "You can't have it because, Homer faltered. "Because I put it there." "I don't believe you," Rachel said angrily. "Why don't you stay where your father's looking for the treasure?" "I can do what I like," Homer flared. "And listen, my father has a right to dig any place he wants to. And that's more than you or the Hollisters or anybody else has." "What do you mean?" Pam demanded. "The mayor of Seagull Beach gave my father permission," Homer replied. "But what would this summer resort look like if everybody who came here dug the place up?" Homer puffed out his chest importantly as he gave his little speech, which the girls knew he had heard some grown-up say. Nevertheless, there might be something to it. Maybe the Hollisters shouldn't hunt for the mystery without permission from the mayor. "I'll ask Uncle Russ," Pam thought. During the last few moments, she had not been holding very tightly to the old oar. Homer noticed this, and quick as a wink he grabbed it and began to run. "You can't have that!" Pam yelled. Both girls set out in pursuit. All three children were fleet-footed, but Homer, who wore sneakers, had the advantage. The soles of Pam's and Rachel's sandals were smooth and slipped in the sand. Homer got way ahead. Halfway to the river, Pam saw Pete and Ricky coming up the beach. As loudly as she could, the girl cried out, "Pete! Ricky! Stop Homer!" Though her voice did not carry to her brothers, they sensed that something was wrong. The girls seemed to be chasing Homer, who was carrying a stick of some sort in his hand. As a matter of fact, the boys were looking for Homer themselves. Ricky had a little score to settle with him. The two boys ran up to Homer and caught hold of him. "Let me go," he shouted. I have to take this to my father right away." "Hold him," Pam cried. In a few seconds, she and Rachel caught up to the others. Ricky was just saying, "Homer, you're a mean boy. You're cruel, too. You took my jar of periwinkles and left them on your dock without any water." "Ah, it didn't hurt 'em," Homer said. "You're the one who can't take care of periwinkles. They'd die up on a porch." Suddenly he realized Pam and Rachel had caught up to him. Homer started to run away. But Pam said, "Give me back that oar. Pete, make him." "Get away from me," Homer shouted defiantly, and gave Pete a push. Pete shoved him and grabbed the oar. In the tussle, it broke apart and fell on the sand. "Now look what you've done," Homer screamed, and gave Pete a hard punch on the chin, which hurt. Pete punched back, and in an instant the boys were fighting hotly. They clinched and rolled over and over. Suddenly, Pete landed a hard one on Homer's nose, and the boy whimpered, "I give up. Take your old oar and your silly periwinkles." He slunk off down the beach. "You fixed him good, Pete," Ricky gloated. Pete grinned and brushed the sand off his clothes and out of his hair, while Pam told the boys about the oar. As soon as they reached home, she found Uncle Russ and told him what Homer had said about getting permission from the mayor before digging for treasure. "I've never heard of such a thing, but I'll check," he said. Going to the telephone, he called the mayor. In a few minutes, he had his answer and reported to the children. "For any big operation, such as Mr. Ruffley's carrying on," Uncle Russ said, "one does need permission to dig. But for only using shovels in the sand, that's all right. I don't think we'll have any more trouble with Homer and his father." "Oh, one other thing the mayor told me. Anything that's part of a wreck must be turned over to the museum here." Then I'll take the ore over there, Pam promised. What about other things people find, like emeralds? Anything that's not part of a ship is finders keepers, Uncle Russ told her. Hooray, Ricky shouted. Let's go dig. That afternoon, the whole family set out for the special dune, carrying shovels and spades. Suddenly, Uncle Russ stopped them and rushed back for his sketching materials. Have to make some cartoons of this expedition, he laughed. First, he asked the treasure hunters, all of whom were in bathing suits, to stand in a row by sizes. Mr. Hollister was first with a big shovel. His wife was next carrying a garden spade. Then came Pete, Pam, Holly, and Ricky, each with a digging implement. At the end was Sue, with a pail and shovel. The Happy Hollister Treasure Hunters, Uncle Russ chuckled as he finished the sketch. Everyone laughed to see himself drawn with extra large heads and small bodies, as cartoons often are. But the faces looked exactly like the artist's relatives. Uncle Russ continued to make pictures of the diggers as they shoveled and spaded near the dune. The Hollisters found all sorts of unimportant articles, like tin cans and broken beach toys, but not one single thing which could have come from the pirate ship they were trying to find. Holly sighed. I guess the sea isn't ready to give up its own, just like Scowbanger said. Either that, Mr. Hollister replied, or else that ore was washed here, and the mystery's lying somewhere else. They gave up, but Pete remarked, We'll find it. Early the next morning, Rachel came to the house. She held a letter in her hand, which she gave to Mrs. Hollister. What does it say? Sue asked eagerly, as her mother pulled out the short note. Mrs. Hollister read it and smiled. Then she said, You children have been invited to eat a sea clam pie at Grandma Alden's. Sea clam pie, Ricky said, scratching his head. What's that, Rachel? The pretty girl gave him a teasing smile and replied, You'll find out when you eat it. And my grandmother has another surprise, too. They had been invited for 12 o'clock, so the children swam and played on the beach until 11. Then they changed into colorful summer clothes and set off with Rachel. Is it a hot pie? Sue wanted to know as they walked along. You'll find out, was all Rachel would tell them. When they arrived at Grandma Alden's, what a delicious odor of cooking floated out to them. Yum, said Ricky. I guess sea clam pie is good. Grandma Alden, her face wreathed in smiles, came out of the kitchen and said that everything was ready. The children took their places at the round dining room table, which had been set with brightly colored plates and napkins. Then Mrs. Alden came in with a large, steaming hot pie. She set it on the table and cut wedges for the children. The Hollisters had not been sure they would like what turned out to be chopped up clams and sauce put between crusts, but each of them liked the taste and ate 2 pieces. During the meal, the conversation turned to the mystery, and Pam asked Grandma Alden if she knew anything about the one survivor of the wreck. Very little, the woman replied. He was found by a couple who lived in a half-house, and when he died they buried him. But a little while afterward, both those folks died too. If that survivor told them any secrets, nobody else ever heard them. Ricky asked what a half-house was, and learned it was really a whole house, but a small one. And now, if you've all finished eating, said Grandma Alden, after she had served fruit and cookies, I'll show you a surprise I have for you. She led them to her workshop in the yard of her home. Inside the shed were all sorts of pottery-making materials, and on one side stood a small kiln with a glass door. Just look in my oven, she invited, and you'll see a present for the Hollister family. It's baking to make it firm. The children peered in and saw a lighthouse, larger and more attractive than the one Pete had mended. This is made from that fine clay you and Rachel found, Pam, Grandma Alden said. I want you to use this lamp in place of the one with the crack. Oh, that's lovely of you, Pam said, and Pete added, Even Dad's good cement couldn't keep the crack from showing on the other one. "How long does the lighthouse have to cook?" Sue asked. Grandma Alden smiled and said 2 days. Before the Hollisters were ready to leave, Rachel would bring it over to Uncle Russ's house. As the elderly woman began to work on a vase, Pam said, "We must go now. Thank you ever so much for lunch. The pie was wonderful." The others thanked her too. Then they said goodbye to Grandma Alden and Rachel and walked to the beach. When they were almost home, Pam stopped short. Putting a hand on Pete's arm, she asked, "Isn't that Homer Roughly on our front porch?" "It sure is," her brother replied, "and there's a man with him. I wonder what they want." Mr. Hollister was just opening the door for the visitors when the children came up on the porch. Homer introduced the man as his father. He was a short, fat man with a large nose, beneath which was a small paintbrush mustache. "I'd like to speak to you about your boys," he said to Mr. Hollister, as they all sat down in the comfortable chairs. Pete's and Ricky's hearts began to pound. What was up?